Logan Carter had always dreamed of a quiet life away from the city. When he finally found a charming property on the outskirts of town, a modest house surrounded by tall trees and a spacious yard, he felt like he had struck gold. The house was exactly what he wanted: private, peaceful, and far enough from the noise of urban life that he could finally breathe. He wasn't looking for anything extravagant. He simply wanted a place where he could unwind, work remotely, and maybe start a small garden. The neighborhood seemed friendly, though he hadn't met many of the residents yet. It was the kind of place where people kept to themselves, which suited Logan just fine. At least that's what he thought during the first few days after moving in. Everything changed the moment he met Karen. The first encounter happened on a crisp morning a week after Logan had settled in. He was outside, fixing the wooden gate at the entrance to his property, when he noticed a woman watching him from the other side of the street. She looked to be in her late 40s or early 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Logan gave her a polite nod, thinking she might come over to introduce herself. Instead, she crossed the street with an air of authority, as if she owned the place, and stopped just a few feet from where he stood. "Hello there," she said in a voice that was far too cheerful to be genuine. "You must be the new owner." "That's right," Logan replied, setting down his tools. "I'm Logan. Nice to meet you." "I'm Karen," she said, flashing that same tight-lipped smile. "I live just down the street. Been here for years, so I know how things work around here." Logan wasn't sure how to respond to that. He didn't see the point of explaining that he wasn't exactly new to homeownership, nor was he interested in being told how to manage his own property. Instead, he simply smiled and nodded, hoping the conversation would remain polite and brief. But Karen wasn't finished. "I noticed you put up that fence," she said, gesturing toward the wooden barrier that separated his property from the public road. "You know, the previous owners never had a fence there. They liked to keep things open for the neighbors, made it easier for everyone to walk through." Logan frowned slightly. He had bought the property as it was, with the existing fence in place, though he had recently repaired it. He wasn't sure why Karen was bringing it up as if it were some kind of issue. "Yeah, I just fixed it up. It was in pretty bad shape when I moved in." Karen's smile faltered for a moment before she quickly recovered. "I see. Well, I just thought I'd mention it since we've always used that path. It's kind of been an unspoken rule in the neighborhood that people can cut through there." Logan didn't like the sound of that. He didn't mind being neighborly, but the idea of strangers wandering across his property whenever they pleased didn't sit well with him. "I wasn't aware of that," he said carefully. "But this is private property now. I'd prefer if people didn't use it as a shortcut." Karen's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, though she kept her tone light. "Oh, I'm sure you'll come around once you get to know everyone. We're a close-knit community here. It's always worked well that way." Logan could tell that she wasn't used to hearing the word no. He decided it was best not to argue further and simply nodded again. "Good to know. Well, I should get back to fixing this gate. Nice meeting you, Karen." Karen lingered for a moment longer than necessary, as if expecting him to change his mind or offer some kind of concession. When it became clear that he wasn't going to, she gave a curt nod and turned on her heel, walking back across the street. Logan watched her go, feeling a strange sense of unease. Something about the interaction didn't sit right with him. He had expected a simple neighborly introduction, not a subtle warning disguised as small talk. Over the next few days, Logan tried to put the encounter out of his mind. He focused on settling into his new home, unpacking boxes, and planning the improvements he wanted to make. But every time he stepped outside, he couldn't help but feel like he was being watched. More than once, he caught a glimpse of Karen standing near her window, looking in his direction. She didn't wave or acknowledge him, she just stood there, observing. Then came the second encounter. Logan was in his backyard one afternoon, laying down new soil for the garden he planned to start, when he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see Karen walking across his lawn, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Hi again," she called out, waving cheerfully. "Just thought I'd take a little stroll. It's such a lovely day, isn't it?" Logan straightened up, wiping the dirt from his hands. "Karen, I don't mean to be rude, but this is private property. I'd appreciate it if you didn't walk through here without asking." Karen's smile didn't waver, but there was a hard edge in her eyes now. "Oh, come on. It's just a shortcut. No harm done, right? We've always done this. It's a tradition." Logan took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. He didn't want to escalate things, but he also wasn't about to let her walk all over him literally or figuratively. "I understand that might have been the case before, but I'm asking you to respect my property. I moved here for peace and privacy." For a moment, it seemed as though Karen might argue further, but then she shrugged and turned to leave. "Suit yourself. But don't be surprised if people start talking. Nobody likes a neighbor who doesn't play nice." Logan watched her walk away, his unease growing. It wasn't just the trespassing that bothered him. It was the way Karen seemed to think she had some kind of claim over his land, as if her years in the neighborhood gave her the right to do whatever she pleased. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but he had a feeling that this wasn't the last he'd hear from her. That night, Logan lay awake, replaying the day's events in his mind. He had dealt with difficult people before, but something about Karen felt different. She wasn't just a nosy neighbor, she was someone who seemed to thrive on control. And Logan was starting to realize that moving to this peaceful neighborhood might come with more challenges than he had anticipated. A few days after the second encounter with Karen, Logan began to notice that her presence around his property wasn't just occasional, it was becoming routine. She would casually stroll by his front yard at least twice a day, always pausing for a moment to glance in his direction if he happened to be outside. Sometimes she would pretend to check her mailbox or talk on the phone, but it was clear to Logan that she was keeping an eye on him. He tried to shrug it off, thinking maybe she was just one of those neighbors who didn't have much to do and enjoyed gossiping about others. Still, it made him uncomfortable. He had moved to this neighborhood for privacy, and now it felt like he was constantly being watched. One morning, as Logan was enjoying his coffee on the back porch, he noticed something unusual. There were fresh tracks in the grass along the edge of his property, leading toward the wooded area behind his house. They were too large and regular to have been made by animals. At first, Logan thought they might belong to some of the neighborhood kids, but the more he looked, the more he realized they were likely left by an adult. The tracks stopped abruptly near the back fence, where the ground had been slightly disturbed, as if someone had been digging. Logan frowned and walked over to the spot. He crouched down and inspected the disturbed soil, noticing that it hadn't been dug deep, just enough to create a shallow groove in the ground. It was strange. Why would someone come onto his property in the middle of the night and dig here? He hadn't planted anything in this area yet, and as far as he knew, there wasn't anything of interest beneath the soil. Still, the whole situation felt off. He stood up and scanned the tree line, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the forest was quiet and still. Shrugging it off for the moment, Logan returned to his house, but he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that someone had been snooping around. He decided to take a walk around the entire perimeter of his property, checking for any other signs of intrusion. It didn't take long before he found something else, a wooden stake driven into the ground near the front of his yard, just a few feet inside his fence line. The stake had a bright red ribbon tied around it, which fluttered slightly in the morning breeze. Logan stared at the stake, his mind racing. He had no idea who had put it there or why. He bent down and pulled it out of the ground, tossing it aside. Whatever it was supposed to mark, it wasn't something he had agreed to. As he straightened up, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. Turning toward the street, he saw Karen standing on the sidewalk, watching him with a smirk on her face. "Morning, Logan," she called out, her voice dripping with fake cheerfulness. "Lovely day, isn't it?" Logan didn't bother responding. He simply gave her a curt nod and walked back toward his porch, ignoring the prickling sensation at the back of his neck. He didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had gotten under his skin. But as he sat down and took another sip of his coffee, he couldn't help but wonder what game she was playing. The stake in the ground, the tracks near the fence, it all seemed too deliberate to be a coincidence. Later that afternoon, Logan decided to reach out to a local surveyor. If Karen was trying to make some kind of claim about his property, he wanted to have clear documentation showing the exact boundaries of his land. He didn't trust her, and he wasn't going to let her push him around. The surveyor, a middle-aged man named Bill, agreed to come by the next morning to take a look. That night, Logan slept fitfully. He kept hearing strange noises outside, rustling leaves, the distant sound of footsteps, but every time he got up to check, there was nothing there. By morning, he was tired and irritable, but he forced himself to get up and prepare for Bill's visit. Around 9 a.m., Bill arrived with his equipment, and together they walked the perimeter of Logan's property. As they reached the back fence, Bill paused and pointed at the disturbed soil Logan had noticed the day before. "Looks like someone's been digging here," he said. "Yeah," Logan replied. "I noticed it yesterday. Any idea why someone would do that?" Bill shrugged. "Hard to say. Could be kids messing around, or it could be someone trying to find an old marker. People do weird things when they think they can dispute property lines." Logan nodded grimly. "That's what I'm worried about. There was also a wooden stake with a ribbon in the front yard earlier. I pulled it out, but I don't know who put it there." Bill frowned. "That's not something you see every day. Let's finish up the survey, and I'll let you know if anything looks unusual." After about an hour of walking and measuring, Bill confirmed what Logan already suspected: the property lines were exactly where the original deed and map indicated they should be. There was no doubt that Logan's fence was entirely within his legal boundaries. Bill promised to send him an official report by the end of the day, which Logan could use as evidence if any disputes arose. Feeling slightly more at ease, Logan thanked Bill and walked into his truck. But as Bill was pulling out of the driveway, Logan noticed Karen standing at the end of the street, watching them with that same smug expression. She didn't say anything, but the way she crossed her arms and tilted her head made it clear that she wasn't happy about Bill's visit. Logan sighed and went back inside, hoping that the survey report would put an end to whatever nonsense Karen was planning. But deep down, he had a feeling that this was only the beginning. His suspicions were confirmed the next morning when he woke up to find an official-looking envelope stuck to his front door. It bore no return address, but the contents made Logan's stomach turn. Inside was a letter from a local legal office, stating that Karen had filed a formal complaint regarding the property lines, claiming that Logan's fence encroached on communal land that was historically shared by the neighborhood. Logan read the letter twice, trying to process the absurdity of the situation. There was no such thing as communal land in this neighborhood, at least, not according to any of the documents he had reviewed before buying the property. The deed clearly stated that the entire lot belonged to him, and now he had a survey report to back it up. But Karen was clearly determined to stir up trouble, and she wasn't going to back down without a fight. He grabbed his phone and called Bill, explaining the situation. Bill assured him that the survey report would hold up in any legal dispute, but he also warned Logan that these kinds of neighborhood conflicts could drag on for months, even years, if the other party was persistent enough. "Just be careful," Bill said. "People like her thrive on drama. Don't give her any ammunition." Logan thanked him and hung up, feeling a mix of frustration and resolve. He wasn't going to let Karen bully him out of his home. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one on his terms. For now, though, he needed to stay calm and think things through. He didn't want to escalate the situation any further unless it became absolutely necessary. As he sat down at his kitchen table, Logan began making a list of everything he needed to do. He would contact a lawyer to draft a formal response to Karen's complaint, gather all the relevant documentation including the deed, survey report, and any correspondence from Karen, and keep a record of every interaction he had with her going forward. It wasn't how he had envisioned spending his time in his new home, but if this was what it took to protect his property, so be it. By the time he finished his list, Logan felt a renewed sense of determination. He wasn't going to let Karen intimidate him. This was his land, his home, and he was prepared to fight for it legally, logically, and without falling into the trap of petty neighborhood squabbles. Little did he know, however, that Karen wasn't done yet. She was just getting started, and the next move she made would push the conflict to a whole new level. The next few days passed in a tense blur. Logan tried to go about his routine, but the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. He had sent the official survey results to the legal office that Karen had used to file her complaint, along with a firm response denying her claims. His lawyer assured him that he had a solid case and nothing to worry about, but Logan wasn't so sure. He knew people like Karen didn't back down easily, especially when they felt their control slipping through their fingers. Every time he stepped outside, he noticed her watching from a distance, either from her porch or through her front window. She no longer bothered with fake pleasantries or her previous passive-aggressive comments. Now her gaze was cold, calculating. The situation escalated further when Logan noticed something peculiar during one of his morning walks around the property. He had taken to checking the perimeter regularly, making sure nothing else had been disturbed. This time he found that someone had once again driven a wooden stake into the ground, but unlike before, it wasn't in the front yard, it was near the side fence, partially hidden behind some bushes. The stake was identical to the one he had removed earlier, with a red ribbon tied neatly around the top. Frustrated, Logan yanked it out of the ground and tossed it aside, wondering how long Karen was going to keep up this bizarre charade. By the afternoon, things had taken an even stranger turn. As Logan was working in his garden, he noticed a small group of neighbors gathered across the street, talking quietly among themselves. He could feel their eyes on him, even though they pretended not to notice when he glanced in their direction. It was clear that Karen had been spreading her version of events around the neighborhood, trying to turn people against him. The thought irritated Logan, but he knew better than to confront them. Engaging in public arguments would only make things worse and give Karen exactly what she wanted: more drama and attention. That evening, Logan received an email from his lawyer. Attached was a copy of Karen's latest legal filing, in which she claimed that a historical pathway existed along the side of Logan's property and that he had illegally obstructed access by maintaining his fence. Logan read the document with growing disbelief. There was no mention of any pathway in the deed or any of the property records he had reviewed. Karen was clearly grasping at straws, hoping to cause enough of a stir to force some kind of concession from him. Logan forwarded the email to Bill, the surveyor, asking if he had ever come across anything about a historical pathway during his work in the area. Bill replied within an hour, stating that he had never seen any record of such a pathway, and that it was highly unlikely one had ever existed. He attached additional documents from the county records office, confirming that the land had always been privately owned and never designated for public use. Despite the reassurance, Logan couldn't shake the feeling that Karen had more tricks up her sleeve. He decided it was time to take additional precautions. Early the next morning, he contacted a local security company and arranged to have cameras installed around his property. If Karen or anyone else tried to trespass again, he wanted clear evidence. By midday, the cameras were up, covering every vulnerable angle: the front yard, the side fence, and the back perimeter near the woods. The system was connected to his phone, allowing him to monitor the footage in real time. For the first time in days, Logan felt a small sense of relief. At least now he had an extra layer of protection. That sense of relief didn't last long. Just as he was finishing lunch, Logan heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway. He stood up and walked to the front door, only to find Karen standing there with two other neighbors. One of them was an older man who lived a few houses down, while the other was a younger woman Logan had only seen in passing. All three of them had stern expressions, and Karen was holding a clipboard. "Good afternoon," Karen said, her voice dripping with false civility. "We wanted to have a word with you about the ongoing situation." Logan crossed his arms and leaned against the door frame. "I don't see what there is to discuss. I've already provided legal proof that the property lines are accurate, and I've sent everything to your lawyer." Karen ignored his comment and continued, her tone growing more forceful. "We've been speaking with other neighbors, and there's a consensus that your actions are disrupting the harmony of the community. This isn't just about property lines, it's about being a good neighbor. People here value openness and cooperation, and you seem determined to isolate yourself." Logan raised an eyebrow. "I moved here for privacy, not to have people walking through my yard whenever they feel like it. If respecting property boundaries is considered being unfriendly, then so be it." The older man, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. "Look, Logan, nobody wants a legal battle here. We're just trying to keep things the way they've always been." Karen's right, there's been an unspoken agreement in this neighborhood for years. If you could just take down a section of the fence and let people use the path, this whole thing could blow over. Logan stared at them incredulously. You expect me to take down my fence because of some supposed unspoken agreement that nobody mentioned until after I moved in? That's not how this works. If you have any legitimate claim, take it to court. Otherwise, stay off my property. Karen's eyes narrowed, and her pleasant facade cracked for a brief moment. You really want to do this the hard way, don't you? She said, her voice now cold and threatening. Fine, but don't say we didn't give you a chance to resolve this peacefully. With that, she turned on her heel and marched back toward the street, the other two neighbors following close behind. Logan watched them go, his mind racing. It was clear that Karen wasn't going to back down, and now she was dragging others into the conflict. He had tried to be reasonable, but reason didn't seem to matter to her. She was determined to get her way, no matter what. That night, Logan double-checked the camera feeds before going to bed. Everything seemed quiet, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Sure enough, around 2 a.m., his phone buzzed with an alert from the security system. Logan sat up, his heart pounding, and opened the app. The live feed showed two figures standing near the back fence, partially obscured by shadows. One of them was holding what looked like a shovel. Logan didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone and dialed the non-emergency police line, explaining the situation and requesting that an officer be sent to check it out. By the time he hung up, the figures had disappeared into the woods, but the camera had captured clear footage of their presence. When the police arrived about 20 minutes later, Logan showed them the footage and pointed out where the trespassers had been. The officers took down his statement and promised to increase patrols in the area, but they warned him that unless the trespassers were caught in the act, there wasn't much they could do beyond filing a report. As the officers drove away, Logan stood in the darkened yard, feeling a mix of anger and determination. Karen had crossed a line by sending people onto his property in the middle of the night. This wasn't just a petty neighborhood dispute anymore, it was turning into something more serious. He didn't know what Karen was after, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going to let her intimidate him. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one, but on his terms. The morning after the late-night intrusion, Logan woke up feeling more drained than he had in weeks. Despite the increased security and the police visit, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from over. Karen wasn't just stirring up neighborhood drama, she was escalating this into something bigger. He didn't want to believe she would go so far as to organize trespassing in the middle of the night, but the evidence was clear. Whoever had been sneaking around his property knew exactly what they were doing, and it was becoming increasingly obvious that they were looking for something. But what? Logan decided it was time to take a more proactive approach. After making a strong cup of coffee, he reviewed the footage from the previous night once more. The two figures had been wearing dark clothing and hats, making it difficult to identify them, but their movements were deliberate. They hadn't just wandered onto the property, they had gone straight to the back fence, the same area where Logan had found the disturbed soil earlier. They must have been trying to dig something up. The thought gnawed at him. What could be buried there that was so important Karen would resort to these lengths? Unsure of his next move, Logan called his lawyer to update him on the situation. The lawyer, a pragmatic man named Ethan, listened carefully before offering his advice. You've done the right thing by getting the police involved and setting up security. Unfortunately, unless they're caught in the act again, there's not much legal recourse right now. If Karen or anyone else continues to trespass, just keep documenting everything. The more evidence we have, the stronger our position will be if this ends up in court. Logan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I get that, but something doesn't add up. They're not just harassing me, they're looking for something. I can feel it. Ethan paused for a moment before responding. If you really believe that, you might want to consider hiring someone to do a ground scan of the area. There are companies that specialize in that: archaeological surveys, metal detection, that kind of thing. It's a long shot, but if there's anything unusual buried on your property, it could explain why they're so persistent. The idea struck Logan as extreme, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. If Karen believed there was something valuable or historically significant on his land, that might explain her bizarre behavior. After thanking Ethan, he hung up and began researching local survey companies. Within an hour, he had scheduled an appointment with a company that specialized in ground-penetrating radar. They agreed to come out the following day to scan the area around the back fence. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but Logan remained on edge. Every time he stepped outside, he felt like he was being watched. Karen didn't make an appearance, but he noticed her curtains twitch when he walked to the mailbox. Clearly, she was keeping tabs on him, waiting for an opportunity to strike again. Logan made a mental note to review the camera footage that evening, just in case anything suspicious happened while he wasn't looking. Early the next morning, the survey team arrived. 2 men in their late 30s, dressed in work boots and carrying high-tech equipment, greeted Logan with professional nods. After a brief explanation of what he wanted, they set to work, carefully scanning the ground along the back perimeter of the property. Logan watched from a distance, feeling a mix of anticipation and anxiety. He didn't know what to expect, but part of him hoped they would find anything that could give him leverage against Karen. An hour later, one of the surveyors approached Logan with a curious expression. "We picked up something," he said. "It's not very deep, maybe a couple of feet down, and it's metallic. Could be an old pipe or some buried scrap metal, but it's definitely not natural." Logan's heart raced. "Can you mark the spot for me? I'll dig it up myself." The surveyor nodded and placed a small orange flag in the ground. Once they packed up their equipment and left, Logan grabbed a shovel from his shed and headed to the marked spot. He worked quickly, the morning sun beating down on him as he dug into the soft soil. After about 15 minutes, the blade of his shovel hit something solid. He crouched down and brushed away the dirt with his hands, revealing a rusted metal box, about the size of a briefcase. Lifting it out of the hole, Logan carried the box to his porch and set it down on the wooden planks. The metal was corroded in places, but the lid seemed intact. Taking a deep breath, he pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside, he found a stack of old, yellowed documents and a small leather pouch. He opened the pouch first, revealing a handful of tarnished silver coins. They looked old, possibly antique, but Logan wasn't an expert on such things. He set the coins aside and turned his attention to the papers. Most of the documents were handwritten, their ink faded with age, but one sheet immediately caught his eye. It was a property deed dated over 70 years ago, listing the original boundaries of the land. Logan scanned the text quickly, noting that the boundaries matched his current survey exactly. However, there was a strange addendum at the bottom, written in a different hand, stating that access to the communal pathway must be maintained for neighboring residents. Logan's brow furrowed. This was the first mention of any so-called communal pathway he had seen, but something about it didn't feel right. The handwriting in the addendum didn't match the rest of the document, and the ink appeared much newer. Was this some kind of forgery? Had Karen or someone else tampered with the original deed in an attempt to fabricate a claim? As he sifted through the remaining papers, Logan found several old letters between previous owners of the property. Most of them were mundane, discussing maintenance and gardening, but one letter stood out. It was addressed to a local historical society, requesting information about a rumored hidden cache that had supposedly been buried on the land during the early 1900s. The letter mentioned silver coins and other valuables, but it seemed the previous owner had never found anything. Logan sat back, his mind racing. Was that what Karen was after? Had she somehow learned about these rumors and convinced herself that there was still something valuable hidden on his property? It would explain her obsession with the so-called pathway and her determination to gain access to his land. Before he could dwell on it further, Logan's phone buzzed. It was Ethan, calling to check in. Logan quickly explained what he had found, including the suspicious addendum on the old deed. Ethan listened carefully before responding. This changes things. If that addendum is fake, and I'm almost certain it is, we can use it against her. I'll get a document expert to take a look at it. In the meantime, keep everything safe and don't let anyone near that box. Logan agreed, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He carefully packed the documents and coins back into the box and locked it in his office. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he had the upper hand. Karen might have thought she could intimidate him into giving up, but now he had something concrete, something that could turn the tide in his favor. That afternoon, as he reviewed the camera footage from earlier, Logan noticed something odd. Around the time the survey team had arrived, Karen had been outside, standing on her porch with a phone pressed to her ear. She appeared agitated, pacing back and forth and occasionally glancing in his direction. It was clear she had seen the surveyors and realized they were looking for something. Logan couldn't help but wonder if she had already guessed what they might have found. As the sun began to set, Logan sat on his porch, watching the street in front of his house. The neighborhood was quiet, but he knew it was only a matter of time before Karen made her next move. She wasn't the type to give up easily, especially not when she thought she had something to gain. But Logan was ready. He had the evidence, the legal support, and now, a growing sense of resolve. Whatever Karen was planning, he was determined to stop her, and this time, he wouldn't be caught off guard. The calm didn't last long. Logan barely had a chance to catch his breath before the situation with Karen escalated again, and this time, it was more aggressive than anything he had experienced so far. The morning after he unearthed the metal box and spoke with his lawyer, Logan awoke to the sound of loud voices coming from the front of his property. Pulling on a jacket, he stepped outside and was immediately met with the sight of several people standing near his front fence. At the center of the group, unsurprisingly, was Karen, gesturing wildly as she spoke to two men who appeared to be contractors. One of them was holding a clipboard, while the other carried a set of surveying tools. Logan approached, keeping his expression neutral despite the frustration bubbling inside him. He didn't want to give Karen the satisfaction of seeing him lose his cool. As he got closer, Karen turned to face him, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. "Good morning, Logan," she said sweetly, though her tone was anything but friendly. "I hope you don't mind, but we're conducting a little survey of our own. You see, there's been some concern among the neighbors about the exact boundaries of your property. I thought it would be best to clear things up once and for all." Logan clenched his jaw, doing his best to remain calm. "Karen, you have no right to conduct any survey on my land. I've already provided official documentation proving that my property lines are accurate. If you want to dispute that, take it up with my lawyer." Karen's smile didn't waver. "Oh, we will. But in the meantime, we're well within our rights to conduct an external survey from the public side of the fence. After all, we wouldn't want any misunderstandings about who owns what, would we?" Logan didn't respond right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone and began recording the scene. Karen's expression flickered briefly, but she quickly composed herself, pretending not to care. Logan knew she hated being recorded. It stripped away her ability to twist the narrative later on. He panned the camera slowly, capturing the faces of the contractors and a few neighbors who had gathered to watch. "Just so we're clear," Logan said, his voice steady, "any attempt to enter my property without permission will be considered trespassing. I've already filed reports with the police, and I won't hesitate to call them again if necessary." Karen's smirk faded slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Nobody's trespassing, Logan. We're simply ensuring that everything is properly documented. You can't blame us for wanting a little transparency." Logan didn't bother arguing further. He knew Karen was trying to provoke him, hoping he'd react in a way that would make him look unreasonable. Instead, he turned and walked back toward his house, keeping the camera trained on the group until he was out of earshot. Once inside, Logan immediately called Ethan to update him on the latest development. His lawyer listened carefully, then sighed. "It sounds like she's trying to pressure you into a mistake. She knows she doesn't have a legal leg to stand on, so she's resorting to public theatrics. Keep documenting everything, and don't engage more than necessary. If they step onto your property, call the police. We'll handle the rest." Logan thanked him and hung up, but the tension in his chest didn't ease. Karen wasn't just annoying, she was dangerous. She was clearly willing to push boundaries, both legal and social, to get what she wanted. And judging by the smug look on her face earlier, she believed she was winning. Over the next few days, things only got worse. Karen ramped up her campaign, spreading rumors among the neighbors and organizing informal meetings to discuss Logan's disruption of the community. Logan noticed more and more people giving him suspicious looks when he walked down the street or worked in his yard. It was obvious that Karen was working hard to isolate him socially, hoping to turn public opinion against him. Then, one afternoon, Logan received an unexpected visitor. A middle-aged man with a weary expression and a clipboard introduced himself as a local code enforcement officer. He explained that a complaint had been filed regarding alleged unauthorized construction on Logan's property. Logan was stunned. "What unauthorized construction?" Logan asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. The officer glanced at his clipboard. According to the complaint, there have been modifications made to the fence and some kind of excavation work near the back of the property. I'm required to follow up on any formal complaint, so I'll need to take a quick look around. Logan's mind raced. He immediately suspected Karen of filing the complaint, but he knew accusing her without proof wouldn't help. Instead, he focused on cooperating with the officer. "Sure, you can take a look, but I have all the necessary permits for the fence repairs, and the only excavation was for personal gardening purposes. I also have documentation from a licensed surveyor confirming the property lines." The officer seemed relieved by Logan's calm demeanor. After a brief inspection, he nodded. "Everything looks in order here. I'll file a report stating that there's no violation. You shouldn't have any more issues unless another complaint is filed." Logan thanked him, but as the officer drove away, a familiar car pulled up nearby Karen's. She didn't get out, but she rolled down the window just enough to give Logan a mocking wave before driving off. The message was clear: she wasn't going to stop. That night, Logan sat in his living room, reviewing the footage from his security cameras. He noticed that, once again, someone had been lurking near the back fence around 3 a.m. They hadn't entered the property, but they had stayed just long enough to make their presence known before disappearing into the woods. Logan felt a surge of frustration. Karen was clearly trying to wear him down, hoping he'd either give up and leave or make a mistake that she could use against him. Determined not to let her win, Logan decided to take things a step further. He contacted a private investigator recommended by Ethan and hired them to look into Karen's background. If she was playing dirty, he needed to know what he was up against. The investigator, a no-nonsense woman named Rachel, assured him that she would dig into Karen's past and see if there was anything useful that could help his case. Meanwhile, Logan continued to document everything. He kept detailed notes of every interaction, saved every email and letter, and made sure his cameras were always recording. He knew it was a waiting game now. Karen was trying to provoke him into making a mistake, but he wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. A few days later, Rachel called with her findings. "You were right," she said. "Karen's been involved in several disputes over the years, mostly petty stuff, boundary disagreements, noise complaints, that sort of thing. But there's something else. A few years ago, she was part of a group that tried to claim a piece of public land near her old neighborhood. They argued that it had historical significance, but they lost the case due to lack of evidence." Logan felt a spark of hope. "Do you think she's trying to do the same thing here?" "It's possible," Rachel replied. "She might be using the old historical pathway argument as a way to justify her claims. If we can prove that she's following the same pattern, it'll weaken her credibility." Logan thanked her and hung up, feeling more determined than ever. He now had a clear picture of Karen's tactics. She was using the same playbook she had tried before, hoping to bully him into submission. But Logan wasn't like her previous victims. He had the evidence, the support, and the resolve to fight back. As he sat down to draft another update for Ethan, Logan couldn't help but smile grimly. Karen thought she could outmaneuver him, but she was wrong. This wasn't just a petty neighborhood squabble anymore, it was a battle, and Logan was ready to see it through to the end. The tension between Logan and Karen reached a boiling point faster than he expected. Over the next few days, it became clear that Karen wasn't just doubling down, she was preparing to make her most aggressive move yet. Early one morning, Logan received a formal letter from Karen's lawyer, demanding that he immediately remove his fence to restore public access to the so-called communal pathway. The letter cited the forged addendum from the old deed that Logan had found in the buried box, as if it were legitimate evidence. Logan knew this was her attempt to intimidate him into submission before he could fully expose her lies. but he wasn't going to be bullied. He wasted no time forwarding the letter to Ethan, his lawyer, who called him within the hour. "This is good," Ethan said. "The fact that they're relying on that addendum shows they're desperate. I've already had the document expert review it, and they confirmed it's a forgery. We can file a counterclaim and demand that they cease any further harassment, or we can go straight to court." "Go straight to court," Logan said without hesitation. "She's not going to stop unless we make it official. If we can prove that she tampered with legal documents, it'll destroy her case." Ethan agreed and assured Logan that he would begin drafting the necessary paperwork immediately. In the meantime, Logan focused on ensuring that his property remained secure. He reinforced the back fence, added extra lighting around the perimeter, and upgraded his security system to include motion-triggered alarms. He wasn't taking any chances. Karen had shown she was willing to escalate things, and Logan was determined to be ready for anything. That evening, as Logan reviewed the day's camera footage, something caught his attention. Around dusk, Karen had been outside again, pacing near the edge of her property with her phone pressed to her ear. She seemed agitated, gesturing angrily as she spoke. Logan couldn't hear what she was saying, but her body language made it clear she was losing control of the situation. For the first time since the conflict began, Logan felt a small sense of victory. Karen's plan was unraveling, and she knew it. The following morning, Logan's doorbell rang. He opened the door to find a sheriff's deputy standing on the porch with a stack of papers in hand. "Mr. Carter, I'm here to serve you a notice. Ms. Karen Miller has filed a temporary injunction requesting that your fence be removed pending a court hearing." Logan took the papers without a word, quickly scanning the contents. The injunction was based entirely on the forged addendum, and it was clear that Karen was hoping the court would act before Logan could present his evidence. Logan's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. This was exactly what Ethan had warned him about, a last-ditch effort to intimidate him before the truth came out. "Thank you, Officer," Logan said, maintaining a polite tone. "I'll have my lawyer handle it." After the deputy left, Logan immediately called Ethan, who was already aware of the situation. "I filed the counterclaim," Ethan said. "We're scheduled for a hearing in 2 days. Don't worry, we have everything we need to shut this down." The next 48 hours were some of the most stressful of Logan's life. Despite Ethan's confidence, the thought of facing Karen in court weighed heavily on him. She had caused him nothing but trouble since the day he moved in, and now it all came down to a single hearing. If the judge sided with her, Logan could be forced to take down his fence and open his property to unwanted intrusions. But if they won, it would finally put an end to Karen's reign of harassment. When the day of the hearing arrived, Logan met Ethan at the courthouse. The atmosphere was tense, with Karen sitting across the room, flanked by her lawyer. She looked calm, almost smug, as if she believed she had already won. Logan resisted the urge to glare at her, focusing instead on Ethan's quiet reassurance. The hearing began with Karen's lawyer presenting their case. They argued that the communal pathway had existed for decades and that Logan's fence was unlawfully blocking access. They relied heavily on the forged addendum, waving it around as if it were irrefutable proof of their claim. Logan clenched his fists under the table, but he stayed silent, trusting Ethan to handle it. When it was their turn, Ethan calmly approached the judge and handed over the original deed, along with the expert's analysis proving the addendum was a recent forgery. He explained that the document had been tampered with and presented a timeline showing that Karen had only started raising issues after Logan moved in. He also submitted the survey report, confirming that the property lines were accurate and that there was no record of any communal pathway ever existing. The judge studied the evidence carefully before turning to Karen's lawyer. "Do you have any response to the allegation that this addendum is a forgery?" Karen's lawyer stammered, clearly caught off guard. "We weren't aware that the document was disputed. My client believed it to be genuine." The judge frowned. "Believed? It's your responsibility to verify evidence before presenting it in court. This document is clearly fraudulent, and I'm not inclined to entertain further arguments based on it." Karen's smug expression vanished, replaced by a look of shock. Logan felt a wave of relief wash over him as the judge continued. Mr. Carter's property lines are valid, and his fence is within his legal rights. The injunction is denied, and I suggest you reconsider pursuing this matter further, Miss Miller. You may be facing legal consequences of your own if it's proven that you knowingly submitted forged documents. Logan couldn't help but glance at Karen, who sat frozen in her chair, her face pale. She had played her final card and lost. After the hearing, Ethan clapped Logan on the back. That went about as well as it could have. If she's smart, she'll drop this entirely. Logan nodded, though he wasn't entirely convinced. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat easily, but for now he was content with the victory. He had stood his ground, proven his case, and forced her into a corner. If she tried anything else, he was ready. As they left the courthouse, Logan felt a renewed sense of peace. He had moved to this neighborhood looking for a quiet life, and while Karen had tried to disrupt that, she hadn't succeeded. He had learned a lot from the ordeal, not just about standing up for himself, but about the importance of being prepared, staying calm, and never letting people like Karen gain the upper hand. For now, it seemed the battle was over, but if Karen decided to stir up trouble again, Logan was more than ready to fight back. In the days following the court hearing, Logan finally felt like he could breathe again. The tension that had hung over his home like a dark cloud for weeks had begun to lift. The judge's ruling was clear, and Karen had no choice but to back off, at least for now. She no longer loitered near his property or tried to engage him in any way. The neighbors who had once avoided him or given him suspicious looks were suddenly much quieter, as if realizing they had sided with the wrong person. Despite the temporary peace, Logan knew better than to assume it was truly over. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She had pushed him to the brink with her lies, manipulations, and illegal actions, and while he had come out on top, she had proven time and again that she wouldn't give up so easily. Still, for the moment, she had no legal footing, and Logan intended to make the most of that. The morning after the hearing, Logan received a call from Rachel, the private investigator he had hired. "I've got something you might want to know," she said, her voice calm but with a hint of satisfaction. "It turns out Karen's situation is a bit more complicated than we thought. She's deeply in debt, and from what I can tell, she's been trying to get her hands on any property she can sell or leverage." Logan leaned back in his chair, processing the information. That explained a lot: her desperation, her relentless pursuit of his land, and even the forged addendum. It wasn't just about control or petty neighborhood politics. Karen had likely been trying to force Logan to give up part of his property so she could profit from it. "Thanks, Rachel, that's useful to know. Hopefully this means she won't have the resources to keep coming after me." Maybe, Rachel said, "but I'd still keep an eye on her. People like Karen don't just stop because they lose once." Logan thanked her and hung up, feeling more determined than ever to stay vigilant. He wasn't going to let his guard down, even if Karen seemed to have backed off for now. He spent the next few days reinforcing his fence and updating his security system, making sure that if Karen or anyone else tried something, he would know immediately. A few days later, Logan was surprised to see one of his neighbors, an older woman named Marlene, standing at his front gate. She had always kept her distance during the conflict, but now she looked almost apologetic. Logan walked over and opened the gate, greeting her with a cautious smile. "Hi, Logan," Marlene said hesitantly. "I just wanted to say." "Well, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have listened to Karen. She made it sound like you were the problem, but after everything that happened in court, it's clear she was lying. I hope there are no hard feelings." Logan was taken aback by the unexpected apology, but he appreciated her sincerity. "Thanks, Marlene. It means a lot. No hard feelings, I get it. Karen's pretty convincing when she wants to be." Marlene smiled, visibly relieved. "If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. And if she tries anything again, you'll have my support." As Marlene walked away, Logan felt a small sense of accomplishment. Slowly but surely the tide was turning. He had endured weeks of harassment and isolation, but now things were finally starting to change. Neighbors who had once been wary of him were beginning to see the truth, and Karen's influence was waning. The final blow came a week later when Logan noticed a for sale sign in Karen's front yard. He wasn't sure if it was the financial pressure, the legal defeat, or the loss of support from the neighbors that had finally driven her to leave, but whatever the reason, he was relieved. He watched from his porch as a real estate agent put up the sign, signaling what he hoped would be the end of the ordeal. By the time Karen moved out, Logan felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He knew there would always be difficult people in the world, people who thrived on conflict and tried to control those around them, but he also knew that he had the strength to stand his ground. This experience had tested him in ways he hadn't expected, but it had also taught him valuable lessons about resilience, preparation, and the importance of community. On the evening of Karen's departure, Logan invited a few of the more supportive neighbors over for a casual barbecue. It wasn't a grand event, just a simple gathering to mark the end of a difficult chapter. As they laughed and talked, Logan felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since moving in. His home finally felt like the sanctuary he had always wanted it to be. As the night drew to a close, Logan stood by the fence, looking out at his now quiet neighborhood. The stars were bright overhead, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves in the trees. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to relax fully. The battle was over, and he had won not just in court but in reclaiming his life and peace of mind. Whatever the future held, Logan knew he was ready. He had faced down Karen's relentless attacks and come out stronger for it. His property was his again, and more importantly, so was his sense of security. As he turned and walked back toward his house, Logan smiled. This was his home, and no one would take it from him.